Okay, today's forum is about the November 2016 California California ballot propositions. Alex Havasy, longtime member of the community, is going to present summaries of the California state ballot propositions that will be on the November 2016 ballot. This summary will include the main arguments in favor of and against each proposition, who is financing it, and how various organizations recommend you vote. Attendees are encouraged to add their input. So, welcome, Alex.
Okay, I'm on. Are you set? You have to focus or anything? All right. Let's see, can I read this better without my glasses? Maybe. Okay, I'll just go through the propositions in numerical order. The first is Proposition 51. It authorizes $3 billion in general obligation bonds, $3 billion for new construction and $3 billion for modernization of K through 12 public school facilities, $1 billion for charter schools and vocational educational facilities, and $2 billion for California community college facilities. These are all facilities. This isn't teachers or anything like that. It bars amendments to the existing authority to level developer fees to fund school facilities until a new construction bond proceeds are spent, money from these bonds are spent, or until December 31st, 2020, whichever comes first. It bars amendment to the existing state allocation board process for allocating school construction funding as to these bonds. That is to say, the allocation board cannot reassign the money. And the money to pay off the bonds will come from the general funds. Its costs are expected to run to $17.6 billion to pay off the principal, $9 billion, and interest of $8.6 billion. That's about $500 million per year for 35 years. The total money spent on campaign there's been over $8 million spent in support of the bond issue, and no money spent in opposition to it. And the principal arguments are, of course, that many colleges, high schools, etc., are in need of maintenance or repairs. Prop 51 would be responsible and has taxpayer protections. It would make affordable education accessible to more Californians, and would improve the education system, and is therefore a good investment. And the main supporters are Coalition for Adequate School Housing and so on. Basically, construction companies and schools are supporting this. Yeah. Among the people opposing it are Governor Jerry Brown, who says it promotes sprawl and squanders money that would be far better spent in low-income communities. He also says it would be better, local bonds would handle this better, would give local control for the money, and that's more efficient. He also says that local voters have shown a willingness to approve local school debt, making a statewide bond proposition unnecessary. It also, the other argument is it does not guarantee equitable distribution of the bond money. And it was written and sponsored by construction companies. Prop 52 is voter approval to divert hospital fee revenue dedicated to Medi-Cal. That's a situation where the state charges hospitals a certain fee, which is used to match government fees, federal government fees, and then return to the schools through mostly through Medi-Cal payments and the direct contribution from the hospitals. So it extends indefinitely an existing statute that was passed in 2009. It uses the fees to fund medical health care services, care for uninsured patients, and children's health coverage. It requires voter approval to change use of the fees, and it permits it can be amended or repealed by legislation with a 2/3 vote. The fiscal impact depends on whether the legislator would have extended the hospital fee absent the measure. If so, it'll have little effect. If not, if they wouldn't have extended the hospital fees, it would be around $1 billion annually. Total campaign cash, almost $60 million in favor of the proposition, and 11.5 million opposed. And supporters were healthcare services, children's hospitals, and so on. It's opposed by the Service Employees International Union, who have contributed pretty much all the money in opposition to it. And they're arguing that the measure would divert funds from patients in favor of corporations and hospital executives. And I'm not sure how that works out, but how am I doing? Am I going too fast?
How many are there?
17. Okay. Prop 53. This is a is California voter approval requirement for revenue bonds above $2 billion. It requires a statewide vote, statewide voter approval before any revenue bonds can be issued or sold by the state for certain projects if the bond amount exceeds $2 billion. It applies to all projects that are financed, owned, operated, or managed by the state or by joint agency formed between the state and a federal agency or another state or whatever. It prohibits dividing projects into multiple separate projects to avoid the statewide voter approval. This is an amendment, by the way, and the idea of, I think it's the dividing the projects into multiple separate projects that amounts to a constitutional amendment. It says the fiscal impact is unknown. It depends on which projects are affected by the measure, whether they are approved by voters, and whether alternative projects or activities implemented by government agencies have higher or lower costs than the original proposal. Been over $5.5 billion in favor of it, and almost $1.5 billion opposed to it. Excuse me.
Is that with a B or an M?
With a B. Haven't done anything smaller than $1 billion yet. Well, except for Prop 51, which had zero money opposed to it. As of August, and actually as of September 2, the only money in support of it were Dean and Joan Cortopassi, who are a politically active group. Those opposed say it'll have a negative effect on local control, and there's no exemption for emergencies or natural disasters, and it will negatively affect drought preparedness and infrastructure repair projects. Okay, Prop 54 is public display of legislative bills prior to vote. This, again, an initiative and a constitutional amendment. It requires that every bill is published in print and online at least 72 hours before each house of the legislature can vote on it. Required that the legislator make audiovisual recordings of its public procedure and publish the recorders online within 24 hours, and allows any individual to record any open legislative proceeding either through audio or visual means and use these recordings for any legitimate purpose. As a fiscal impact, they expect one-time costs of about $1 to $2 million and ongoing costs of about $1 million annually to record the legislative meetings and make videos of these meetings available to the public. There's been over $9 billion in support of it, and no money has been used to oppose it. The supporters say this will end the gut and amend maneuver, which legislative leaders hollow out innocuous bills and insert new language on unrelated but often controversial issues. And the opposition says that requiring legislature to wait 3 days before voting on a bill will give powerful lobbyists and well-funded special interests time to attack a bipartisan compromise. He says special interests already have too much power in Sacramento, and this will give them more. Okay, Prop 55. This is an extension of Proposition 30, which was income tax increases for people making over $250,000. $250,000 for single filers, $500,000 for joint, and $340,000 for heads of household. It allocates these tax revenues 8.9% to K through 12 schools and 11% to community colleges. Allocates up to $2 billion per year in certain years for health care programs, and I'm not sure what the certain years refers to. And it bars the use of education revenues for administrative costs, but provides local school boards discretion to decide in open meetings and subject to annual audit how revenues are to be spent. The fiscal impact will increase state revenues from $4 billion to $9 billion each year in today's dollars through 2019, from 2019 through 2030, depending on the economy and the stock market. It'll increase funding for schools and community colleges, increase funding for health care for low-income people, and increase budget reserves and debt payment ranging from $60 million to roughly $1.5 billion each year. By the way, the California budget is about $165 billion. Total cash for the project, almost $42 billion has been spent in favor of the initiative. No money has been spent opposing it. Supported by California Hospitals Committee, California Teachers Association, State Council of Service Employees, the SEIU, that was the, yes, thank you, Service Employees International Union, and the Federation of Teachers. And support says the will not raise taxes will not raise taxes for anyone, since it's extending an existing tax situation. It will only affect the wealthiest Californians. Would provide strict accountability and transparency standards, and would prevent budget cuts while continuing to restore funding lost during the recession. Opposition says, first, it extends a measure that was supposed to be temporary. It would extend taxes during a time when higher taxes are not necessary. Education, healthcare, and state government can be funded without new or higher taxes, making it unnecessary. It would hurt small business, and it would favor special interests and politicians. If we have time at the end, we should go through these and discuss what we like and what we don't like. Proposition 56 is the tobacco tax increase. It'll increase cigarette tax by $2 per pack, with the increase on other tobacco products and electronic cigarettes containing nicotine. Allocates revenues primarily to increase funding for existing healthcare programs, also for tobacco use prevention and control programs, tobacco-related disease research, and law enforcement. Also, University of California physician training, dental disease prevention programs, and administration. It causes if tax causes decreased tobacco consumption, it transfers the tax revenues to offset these decreases to existing tobacco-funded programs and sales tax revenues. Okay. The impact, it'll increase state revenue by about $1 billion to $1.4 billion, with potentially lower annual revenues over time. They'll be allocated to various specific purposes, with most used to augment spending on healthcare and low-income Californians. Total cash spent in support has been a little over $18.8 billion. Money spent in against the proposition is almost $56 billion. It's supported by hospitals, dental associations, mostly healthcare industry. Opposed is Philip Morris, several Philip Morris subsidiaries, J.R. Reynolds. Pretty much what you'd expect.
Yeah. Did you say billion?
Billion.
With a B?
With a B, yes. Yes, so the California the California budget of $165 billion doesn't sound like a lot when you look at the money going into supporting and opposing these. Proposition 57 is parole for nonviolent criminals and juvenile court trial requirements. It's again a combined constitutional amendment and statute. But here about the history allows parole considerations for persons convicted of nonviolent felonies upon completion of prison term for their primary offenses as defined. Authorizes the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to award sentence credits for rehabilitation, good behavior, or educational achievements. Requires the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to adopt regulations to implement the new parole and sentence credit provisions and certify that they enhance public safety, and provides that juvenile court judges shall make the determination upon prosecutor motion whether juveniles age 14 and older should be prosecuted and sentenced as adults for specific offenses. Apparently that's presently not the judge's decision. Fiscal impact. Net state savings likely in tens of millions of dollars annually, primarily due to reduction in the prison population. The exact savings would depend on how certain provisions are implemented. Bit over $7.5 billion has been spent in support of the proposition, and nothing has been spent in opposition. I don't really have a list there was no opposition. That's why I don't have a list of the opposition money. People in support say the measure will encourage nonviolent offenders to use their prison time to improve themselves. Opposition describes it as another effort by Governor Brown to rid the state of its inconvenient prison population by turning prisoners loose on the public. Proposition 58 is non-English languages allowed in public schools. I don't have the number here, but there was something on the ballot a few years ago that required all courses to be taught in English. This preserves the requirement that public schools ensure that students become proficient in English. It requires the school districts to solicit parent and community input, developing language acquisition programs to ensure English acquisition is as rapidly and effectively as rapid and effective as possible. It requires that school districts provide students with limited English proficiency the option to be taught English in nearly all English, as opposed to being taught English and Spanish, I suppose. Authorizes school districts to establish dual language immersion programs that both native and non-native for both native and non-native English speakers. Allows parents, legal guardians of students to select an available language acquisition program that best suits their child. So it leaves a lot up to the local schools, I guess. Total cash in favor of the proposition is a bit over $814 million. We're down in the millions now. No money has been spent in opposition. Support by Teachers Association, California School Administration's SEIU Local 2015, United Food and Commercial Workers Western States Issues PAC, California Faculty Association Political Issues Committee, and the United Domestic Workers of America.
Are those opposed or?
Those are in favor of it. Basically, teachers like the idea. They're given more control. Yeah, that's one of the among the oppositions. It would allow all students to become proficient in English as soon as possible, and this is probably argued. Would encourage schools to use instruction programs rather than expand multilingual education, thereby providing English speakers the opportunity to learn a second language. Excuse me. It would restore local control to California schools. It would prepare students more effectively for the future, and it would encourage intercultural interactions and empathy. Those opposed say, first of all, it's repealing a previous proposition that required California children to be taught English in public schools. The proposition would lift restrictions on California legislature to make future changes, enabling the schools to establish Spanish almost only instruction in schools. And the proposition would overturn policies that actually improve language education. So what they're saying, I guess, is that things are working and don't fix them. Okay, Prop 59, this is an advisory question. It has no legal authority. It's overturn of Citizens United Act advisory question. Shall California's elected officials use all of their constitutional authority, including but not limited to proposing and ratifying one or more amendments to the United States Constitution, to overturn Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, and some numbers there, and other applicable judicial precedents to allow the full regulation of or limitation of campaign contributions and spending, and to ensure that all citizens, regardless of wealth, may express their views to one another and make clear that corporations should not have the same constitutional rights as human beings. Okay. Total campaign cash is almost $78 million, down to the millions again, in favor and nothing opposed. Support says it would overturn Citizens United and ensure that the voice of people is not drowned out by corporations and billionaires, and the proposition would limit excessive political spending. Opposition say it's a non-binding advisory question and therefore shouldn't clog the ballot. Would hurt small businesses and other entities that are incorporated as corporations, would be ineffective because it fails to prohibit or limit prohibit or limit corporate and union contributions to candidates, elected officials, and political parties. And it would allow California Congress members to tinker with the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which contains important citizens' rights that should not be changed lightly.
What number was that?
That's 59. Okay, Proposition 60, condoms in pornographic films, requires that performers in adult films use condoms during filming of sexual intercourse. Requires producers of adult films to pay for performer vaccinations, testing, and medical examinations related to sexually transmitted disease. Requires producers of adult films to obtain state health license and to post condom requirements at film sites. Imposes liability on producers for violations on certain distributions or performers if they have a financial interest in the film involved, and on talent agents who knowingly refer performers to non-complying producers. It permits state performers or any state resident to enforce the violation. Likely impact, likely reduction in state local tax revenues of several $1 million per year. Increased state costs that would exceed $1 million annually to license and regulate adult film production and to enforce workplace health and safety rules. This cost would be offset to some extent by new fee revenue. The total campaign cash, a little over $2.2 billion in favor of it and $271 million opposed. Support says it would hold pornographers accountable to work safety and health by closing loopholes and improving enforcement of existing laws. Excuse me. It would only hold adult film producers, directors, agents accountable, not adult performers. Production would reduce the risk of sexually transmitted disease for adult performers and for the larger community. It would save taxpayers money in that taxpayers would have to pay for less treatment for sexually transmitted diseases and other related diseases. As of September 15th, the largest and only donor for support of this was the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Opposition. Opposition says, according to California's nonpartisan fiscal advisor, Prop 60 would cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars each year, money that could be spent on education, libraries, etc. It refers to it as the ultimate trial lawyer ballot measure. It gives every Californian the right to sue adult film performers, including LGBT performers, on-set workers, cable and satellite television companies. The initiative's presumption of liability could apply to every adult film on cable television today. It would force adult film performers to publicly disclose private information, including their legal names and home addresses. State employees will have to review adult films. That's rough. Now, I haven't followed this, but I've seen this in several comments, and it says that the proponent of this bill is authorized to be sworn in as a state employee. He cannot be fired. Only the legislators can vote him out of the job. State employees will have to... We did that one. And the last comment is married couples who film in their own houses can be sued. Opposition is from Wicked Pictures, EA Productions, Cybernet Entertainment, Wicked Sensual Care Incorporated, and AEB, and I'm not sure what that stands for, but I could guess. Proposition 61, drug price standards. Would prohibit state agencies from buying any prescription drug from a drug corporation at any price over the lowest price paid for the same drug by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, except as may be required by federal law. It applies to any program where the state agency is the ultimate payer of the prescription drug, even if the state agency does not itself buy the drug. It exempts purchases of prescription drugs under managed care programs funded through Medi-Cal. Fiscal impact. This is still uncertain, and they list 3 possible scenarios that could affect the price. First is that the drug manufacturers do offer the lowest VA prices to the state. There'll be some savings, which could be offset if the manufacturers raise the prices of other drugs paid for by the state, but not purchased by the VA. The drug manufacturers could decline to offer the lowest VA prices of the state. This is the bill is a requirement on the state agency, not on the manufacturer. Where am I? And there's further uncertainty depending on how the state responds to this. The state programs could modify formularies, that is the drugs offered. They have state departments and programs have discretion over which drugs they make available to their beneficiary. State entities may change which drugs they make available, offering only those drugs that the VA does not purchase and drugs that manufacturers will offer at the lowest VA price. Or the DHCS, and I'm not sure what that stands for, they may have to disregard the measure's price ceiling. That's if the drug companies refuse to offer the lowest price. The third scenario is that the drug manufacturer will raise VA prices given their new benchmark. Okay, campaign cash, $9.5 billion in support, $86.5 billion opposed. Main support is AIDS Health Foundation, Californians for Lower Drug Prices, and California Nurses Association. Opposition is Merck and Company, Pfizer Incorporated, Johnson & Johnson. You get it. Basically all drug companies here. Support says it would fight price gouging from drug companies. It would provide better access to life-saving drugs and would save taxpayers billions of dollars. Opposition says it will hurt veterans by increasing prescription drug prices to them, would reduce patient access to medicines, would increase bureaucracy, red tape, lawsuits, and taxpayer costs, would increase state prescription drug costs. I suppose that's the ones that the companies might raise the price on that are not provided to the VA. And they also argue that the proponent of the bill wrote special provisions for his own organization regarding the proposition. Unfortunately, I don't know who the writer is. Okay, Proposition 62, repeal of the death penalty. And I'm going to jump from this to Proposition 66, which is related. 62 is fairly straightforward. Repeals death penalty as maximum punishment for persons found guilty of murder and replaces it with life in prison without the possibility of parole. It applies retroactively to persons already sentenced to death. It states that persons found guilty of murder and sentenced to life without possibility of parole must work while in prison as prescribed by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and increases the portion of the life inmate's wages that can be applied to victim restitution. Fiscal impact. Net ongoing reduction in state and county costs related to murder trials, legal challenges to death sentence, and prisons of around $150 million annually within a few years. It could be higher or lower by tens of millions of dollars, depending on various factors. $4.5 billion has been spent in support, and $4 billion spent opposed to it. Support says it would save taxpayer money by replacing a costly, ineffective system that's not working, would provide criminals the opportunity to work to pay restitution to their victims, would provide victims' families closure, would eliminate the risk of executing an innocent person, and it is supported by former death penalty advocates. Opposed say it would protect the worst criminals while diminishing protection of victims' rights, would cost taxpayers billions of dollars, and would end the death penalty system when it should be amended. And supported by various individuals. I don't know if the names mean anything to you. Nicholas McCohen, Reed Hastings. Opposed by California Correctional Peace Officers Association, Peace Officers Research Association, California Association of Highway Patrolmen, and Henry Nicholas. Oh, and the Los Angeles Protective League Issues PAC. Prop 66, on the other hand, is the death penalty procedures. It changes procedures governing state court appeals and petitions challenging death penalty convictions and sentences. It designates superior court for initial petitions and limits successive petitions. It establishes a time frame for state court death penalty review. It requires appointed attorneys who take non-capital appeals to accept death penalty appeals. Exempts prison officials from existing regulation process for developing execution methods. It authorizes the death row inmate transfers among California prisons, increases a portion of condemned inmates' wages that will be applied to the victim restoration, and states that other voter-approved measures related to the death penalty will be void if this measure receives more affirmative votes. Fiscal impact is unknown. Ongoing fiscal impact on state court costs for processing legal challenges. Elsewhere, there was a comment that will be a net increase, an initial increase, because there'll be more appeals filed, and but after the expiration date, there'll be fewer because they won't have as much time to appeal. That's what it says here. Near-term increases in state court cost, potentially in tens of millions of dollars annually, due to the acceleration of spending to address new timelines on legal challenges to the death penalty sentences, and savings of similar amounts in future years. And potential state prison savings that could be in the tens of millions of dollars annually. Yes, money spent in support is almost $4 billion, and opposed over $5 billion. It's supported by California Peace Officers Association, basically the same people who opposed the previous measure, which was 63, 2, thank you. Yes, same names appear both ways. Anyway, the support says it would speed up death penalty appeals, would mean that the worst criminals receive the strongest sentences, would provide closure to victims' families, and would save taxpayers millions of dollars. I don't seem to have the statements from the opposed, but I suspect they're obvious. Okay, if comparing the two, 62 replaces death penalty with life in prison, whereas 66 changes the death penalty procedures to speed up appeals and so on. 62 retroactively applies to criminals and require prisoners sentenced to life in prison without possible parole to work to pay restorations to victims' family. Portion of wages to be provided as restitution would be increased to 60%. 66 would also require prisoners on death row to work in prison to pay restitution to victims, and the amount of that restitution would be increased, but it doesn't specify the amount. 62 says any provision found to be invalid will not affect the other provision of the measures. And 66 stipulates that other death penalty measures approved would be void in the event that more affirmative votes are given to Prop 66. I'm not sure, that might have to get worked out in the courts. That was the one. Okay. Let's go into Proposition 63. Background, what are we doing on time, by the way? Not bad. Background checks for ammunition purchases and large capacity ammunition magazine ban. Requires individuals to pass a background check and obtain a Department of Justice authorization to purchase ammunition. It prohibits possession of large capacity ammunition magazines and requires their disposal as specified. It requires most ammunition sales to be made through licensed ammunition vendors and reported to the Department of Justice. Requires lost or stolen firearms and ammunition to be reported to law enforcement. It prohibits persons convicted of stealing a firearm from possessing firearms. It establishes new procedures for enforcing laws prohibiting firearm possession, and it requires the Department of Justice to provide information about prohibited persons to Federal National Instant Crime Background Check System. Fiscal impact, increased state and local court law enforcement costs, potentially in tens of millions of dollars annually, related to new court processes for removing firearms and prohibiting persons after they are convicted. Also, potential increase in state costs, not likely to exceed millions of dollars annually, relating to the regulating ammunition sales. These costs would likely be offset by fee revenues. Potential net increase to state and local correctional costs, not likely to exceed the low millions of dollars annually, related to changes in firearm and ammunition penalties. As of September 16th, money spent in support of it is $4.2 billion. Money spent in opposition has only been $450 million, $454 million. And the argument is that the proposition would keep guns and ammunition out of the wrong holes by closing loopholes in existing laws. It would protect the rights of law-abiding citizens who own guns for self-defense, hunting, and recreation, and would address the issue of illegally armed felons. The opposition says it would burden law-abiding citizens who own firearms. It would not keep terrorists and violent criminals from accessing firearms and ammunition, would divert resources away from local law enforcement and burden an already overburdened court system, would make Californians less safe and waste public resources and money. It would be difficult, and it would be difficult for a legislature to amend. Major donors are California Democratic Party, Newsom for California, and some individuals, Sean Parker, George Marcus, Nicholas Pritzker. Opposition donors, National Rifle Association, California Rifle and Pistol Association, Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, Gun Owners of California, and Firearms Policy Coalition. We're almost there. Proposition 64 is marijuana legalization. Legalizes marijuana under state law for the use of adults 21 or older. Designates state agencies to increase and regulate to license and regulate the marijuana industry. Imposes a state excise tax of 50% on retail sales of marijuana and state cultivation taxes on marijuana of 9.25% of flowers and 2.75% per ounce on leaves. It exempts medical marijuana from some taxation. It establishes packaging, labeling, advertising, and marketing standards and restrictions for marijuana products. It provides marketing and prohibits marketing and advertising directly to minors. Allows local regulation and taxation of marijuana, and authorizes sentencing and destruction of records for authorizes resentencing and destruction of records for prior marijuana convictions. Fiscal impact. The size of the measure's fiscal impact could vary depending on how state and local governments choose to regulate and tax marijuana, whether the federal government enforces federal laws prohibiting marijuana, and how marijuana prices and consumption change under the bill. Over $18 billion has been spent in support, and a little over $707 million in opposition. Excuse me. Okay, support says it has specific safeguards to protect children while allowing responsible use. It would incorporate best practices from other states that have already legalized marijuana. Would generate tax revenues and decrease law enforcement costs, providing funding for things like after-school programs, drug prevention, etc. Would prevent legislators from using generated revenue for their pet projects, and would provide an environment where marijuana is safe, controlled, and taxed. Opposition says it would result in more highway fatalities and impaired driving, would allow marijuana growing near schools, parks, and would erode local control, would increase black market and drug cartel activity, would allow marijuana smoking advertisements to be aired, would hurt underprivileged neighborhoods, and would put small marijuana farmers in Northern California out of business. Big marijuana. Support is some individuals, Sean Parker, the Drug Policy Action Group, which has donated $3 billion. The Sean Parker alone has donated $6,263 million, a little over that actually. New Approach PAC, which I gather is marijuana legalization, $1.5 billion. Californians for Sensible Reform, $750,000. Drug Policy Action opposed is Smart Approaches to Marijuana Action, SAM, which is $64,000. We're down in the thousands of dollars here. California Teamsters, Public Affairs, Association of Highway Patrolmen, that was $12,500. California Police Chiefs Association, LA County Professional Peace Officers Association, and the California State Sheriff's Association. They're all opposed to it. Okay, and then the ugly stepchild here. This is Proposition 56. Excuse me, 65. And this is dedicated revenue from disposable bag sales to wildlife conservation funds. It redirects money collected by groceries and certain other retail stores through the sale of carryout bags whenever any state law bans free distribution of a particular kind of carryout bag and mandates the sale of, whenever, it's hard to tell where a sentence ends. Whenever any state law bans free distribution of a particular kind of carrier bag and mandates the sale of any other kind of carrier bag. It requires stores to deposit bag sale proceeds into a special fund administered by the Wildlife Conservation Board in support of specified programs, and provides for boards to develop regulations implementing the law. So basically it's saying the sale of shopping bags will go, that's caused by the ban of plastic bags, will go to a wildlife fund. Fiscal impact, potential state revenues of several tens of millions of dollars annually under certain conditions. And the revenue would be used to support certain environmental programs. Over $6 billion has been spent in support of it, and no money so far has been spent in opposition. Support says it would stop the deal made between legislators and lobbyists that allow grocery stores to keep plastic bag fee revenue as extra profits, which seems kind of straightforward. I'm not sure why that's considered a deal. Would give voters an additional opportunity to voice how they want revenue from bag bans spent. Would dedicate plastic bag fee revenue to environmental projects. Opposition says it would only serve the interest of the plastic bag companies. And that's because of Prop 67, which I'll go into next. It would do little to help the environment, as plastic bags need to be eliminated completely in order to have an effective input. Would create an unnecessary bureaucracy and would undermine retail support for Proposition 67 by turning the 10-cent fee for retailers into a government tax. Says proponents of it are attempting to confuse voters. Okay, let's go on to Proposition 67. This is a veto referendum. That means that this is a bill passed by the Senate. SB 270, excuse me. It was challenged by Proposition and is now on the ballot to be approved by voters. So Prop 67 would ratify Senate Bill 270. It would prohibit large grocery stores and pharmacies from providing plastic single-use carryout bags, and small grocery store, convenience stores, and liquor stores from doing so the following year. Allows single-use plastic bags for meat, bread, produce, bulk food, and perishable items. The mandate stores to charge 10 cents for recycling compostable and reusable grocery bags, exempts consumers using a payment card or a voucher issued by the California State Supplementary Food Program from being charged for bags, and provides $2 million to state plastic bag manufacturers for the purpose of helping them retain jobs and transition to making thicker, multi-use recyclable plastic bags. So this would basically ban it, and the 65 would allow sale and direct the money to wildlife conservation funds. Fiscal impact. Relatively small fiscal impacts on state and local governments. Minor increase of less than $1 million annually for state administrative costs offset by fees. Possible minor savings to local governments from reduced litter and waste management costs. $2.397 billion has been spent in support, and $6.13 billion in opposition. Support says it would help the environment by reducing litter, protecting oceans and wildlife, and reducing cleanup costs. It would continue California's success in phasing out plastic bags. Nearly half the state has already banned them. It's opposed by four large out-of-state plastic bag companies. And it says recycling plastic bags isn't enough in California. Less than 5% get recycled. Opposition, whether they're quoting a spokesman for the American Progressive Bag Alliance, says the plastic bag industry obviously is opposed to this particular piece of legislation because it seeks to ban a 100% recyclable product and also puts fees on consumers for other bag alternatives. It's all orchestrated as a cash grab by members of California Grocers Association to scam California consumers out of billions of dollars in bag fees, none of which goes to a public purpose. So the basic difference, and there's a question of whether both or either of these pass, if 65, which directs the money to Wildlife Conservation Fund passes, and 67 also passes, the statewide the ban on carry-out bags will be used, and the use of the money for the carry-out bags will depend on whether Proposition 67 gets more votes than 65. If more yes votes for, I'm losing track of which is which. Yeah. Yes, if more yes votes go to 65, then the revenue from the bag stays with the stores. If more yes votes for the initiative go to the state for environmental programs, then then the money will go to environmental programs.
Scamming or something.
Yes. If Prop 65 fails, and 67 passes, and the carrier. I'm sorry, I've got to. Okay, 65 is the one that redirects. So if the 65 passes and 67 fails, the grocery stores will keep their money from bag sales. If 67 fails, then there's basically no carry-out bag policy. But if one is instated, it will have to follow the rules provided in 65, which says that if a bag ban is instated or bag ban is instated, then the sale of replacement bags will go to the environment. And if they both fail, we have no policy on plastic bags, no statewide policy. There. Any questions?
Okay, hold on a second.
Sure.
So remember, you have to wait for the microphone. We have two people, one's ahead of you.
And I can tell you ahead of time the answers I don't know. But
some comment and perspective on the 64, the marijuana proposition.
Mm-hmm.
You'll note one of the, right now this is an industry of small growers on small plots, tend to be local, family-oriented, etc. There's also the other side of it, trimmigrants, which tend to be local people stripping the leaves, processing, preparing. It's all small-scale farming and business activity. You'll notice the proposition. What's happening now is the tobacco companies are gearing up, and other land speculators are out there trying to buy up land. There's a 5-year ban on large-scale licensing issues. Now, why is that there? Because they know that's where this is headed. And that's like a, we'll toss a bone to you people. We won't let the big corporate interest and moneyed interest come in for 5 years. I'm not at all against the marijuana, but the current medical marijuana laws, anybody who wants to use can get a medical thing to be approved and buy. The danger with this is you're going to have large-scale companies, large-scale speculators, people destroying local family and other businesses and activities. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to point out that we only have about 5 more minutes for questions. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, what was your source for this?
Hold on a second.
Most of the information I got was from Ballotopedia. Yeah.
What did you say?
My question was, where was your source? And he said Ballotpedia.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Here.
The small growers in Northern California are overwhelmed by the mob influence that's up there, and it's a dreadful, dangerous situation for everybody involved. And
yeah, you mentioned that Governor Brown was voting no or did not support one of the propositions. And I was wondering, do we know where he stood on all of these?
No.
Because I trust his
I
judgment
don't.
more than I do the average. But there are 2 of them that we know his opinion, but we don't know his opinion on the rest.
I could probably find out, but I don't have it here.
Thanks. Unless I'm mistaken, because it's all rather confusing, I think that the marijuana law that's proposed would include some sort of labeling of, right? Of like how strong it is, what you're getting, and, because right now that's not at all true. I mean, you could, and it would make edible marijuana, give some sort of classification to that, because otherwise it's just a total mystery, I think. And if you want to have anything to do with it, probably it maybe should go through a doctor at this point. Although I'm not so sure that they know anything about the gradations either.
I've seen the marijuana stores in Colorado, and they've got descriptions of the different grasses and what you can expect from them. It all looks very interesting. I should read what it says here. What it is, and this isn't the bill itself. This is a description of it. It establishes packaging, labeling, advertising, marketing standards, and restrictions for the product. So I assume that would cover strength, THC levels.
Okay, Sena mentioned the illegal farming of marijuana up in the north, and I'd just like to comment that we have a lot of this right here in Santa Cruz County, up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and we're on the volunteer group, and we are told sometimes, frequently, not to go into areas because it's dangerous.
Thank you.
How about the idea of printing up a list of these and putting in what a humanist would vote, like a recommended vote on these propositions? You ever thought of doing that?
I considered it, but I kind of spent the week just figuring out what they were, and I haven't really decided on a lot of them. And I'd really like to discuss that with individuals before I come up with my...
Just a comment. I'm active in the League of Women Voters, which publishes an annual description of each of these, and I have, I think, 25 copies on order, which I will make available here.
Oh, good.
And they do an excellent job of the summaries, pro and against, laying out who supports and who's against them. The kind of information you have, but in a very accessible format. I had hoped I'd have them by today, but they didn't arrive. But they will be.
Is it on the website? No. Oh, it's on the League of Women Voters website. Yeah, right. It's available there. You can print them out. Okay, I guess we've just about ready for a wrap here. Let's give Alex a hand.
Thank you.